Okay, now we're heading north. Remember that we stopped at Manhattanville and Columbia in Harlem, and now we're heading north through the Bronx up to Westchester, which is another hotbed. So I hope that you're beginning to see how rich this region really is, with all of these pockets that are now connected by mass transportation. So why don't you all introduce yourselves and your institutions, and then we can get started.
Guy Liebler, Simone Development Companies based in the Bronx.
Eric Feinstein, President and CEO of Clarapath.
Gordon, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you could make it.
Well, thanks, Nancy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, Gordon Tomaselli. I'm the Dean at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine.
Just keep going. Let's see.
Okay. Raj Ratan. I'm the CEO of the Burke Neurological Institute. We're affiliated with Weill Cornell Medicine.
Mm-hmm. Barry?
Barry Kappel. I'm the founder and CEO of Sapience Therapeutics, a drug discovery and development company located in New York Medical College's BioLink incubator.
And Jonathan?
I'm Jonathan Bandel, Chief Innovation Officer at White Plains Hospital and Managing Director of East Coast Road Ventures.
Terrific. So, Guy and Gordon, you are doing some exciting things up in the Bronx, and the state is helping out by putting a new subway stop right in the middle of everything to make it accessible. So tell us what is happening.
So it is actually an MTA train stop, one of four to be built in the Bronx starting next year and opening all in late 2025, which will be a connection from New York Penn Station up to Stamford. So for the first time, we will have real train connectivity, which we think is a real game changer for the region. So we are in the Bronx Central, right in the middle of Manhattan and Westchester County. We think that there is a tremendous, we've heard about value propositions and economy in some of the conversations this morning. What we can develop in the Bronx is probably a third less than some of the great projects you saw and were presented this morning. So there is a value alternative. There is great transportation, not only the train that will be coming in a couple of years, but also our location right on the Hudson River Parkway and New York Thruway, Route 95. We are 10 minutes from LaGuardia Airport and 25 minutes from JFK. We think that all of those conveniences are instrumental for healthcare and life sciences. So we are developing, beginning next spring, a 1.8 million square foot campus. The first phase will be 1 million square feet. So of course it has the ability to expand. Our first building is 300,000 square feet, which will start in May or June of next year, and will be designed as a full lab building. In addition to our ability to create a series of buildings for lab and medical office, we have the opportunity to build 250 residential apartments for researchers and scientists and office workers and students who will all be on campus. We think that's a unique opportunity as well. And we will have a hotel and retail stores and restaurants, creating our own ecosystem, another word we heard this morning. As I hand off to Gordon, one of the great attributes that we have, in addition to the location and the value and the transportation, is the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, which incubates companies and is a large receiver of NIH grants, and they couldn't be a better neighbor and partner for us.
Gordon, you want?
Guy.
Go ahead.
Guy, thanks, and hopefully you can hear me, but I think Guy really set the stage quite well for the attractiveness of the Bronx. Let me explain a little bit about what's available at the college. We view ourselves as being part of this, the northeast end of this corridor of life sciences in New York City in Morris Park, and with the south end being in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, and lots of things in between. The advantages that we have are We are an academic medical center. We are an NIH-funded, research-intensive academic medical center that has a number of core facilities that would be quite useful to many startups that exist on our campus, to the several startups that exist on our campus now, and we'd make accessible to others in the ecosystem. The other thing that we've been really quite successful at doing recently is we competed for the New York City Economic Development Corporation funding for something that we call Embark. Embark is using an existing structure that is Van Etten Hospital, which is an old tuberculosis hospital that we now run, that we've renovated, and part of that renovation includes existing laboratories for pediatrics and other subspecialty groups at Einstein, but a space to create a GMP facility. And this GMP facility would be specifically designed, and I think what we've been through in the last 20 months more than justifies this, for the development of both cell and antibody therapies. And these would be, the targets would be things like cancer, pandemic disease, and the like. So we're leveraging the fact that we have an existing building that can be relatively efficiently repurposed for this. We have access to not only our facility, but we have access across the railroad tracks to what's going on at Simone. And Guy described to you things that we hope will be the formation of a partnership where there'll be exchange of ideas and exchange of activities across the railroad tracks, benefited by new transportation that will be a part of our ecosystem, which I think really will be catalytic for the development of biomedical science and life sciences in New York City. So that's that we're part of a group of funded teams that the New York City has recently funded as part of the EDC. In addition to what we've been able to do at Einstein, Columbia University, the New York Stem Cell Foundation, and Rockefeller University has gotten an infusion of capital from the city for development of the life sciences infrastructure. So let me just stop there and perhaps pass it on to others.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's so interesting about what you're doing up in the Bronx is that you serve, from an equity point of view, and we started talking about this morning, how important it was for the underserved communities in New York to have access to jobs, but also access to good health care. And you serve one of the most diverse populations in the city, right, Gordon?
Absolutely. The population is about 80% Medicare, Medicaid. It is largely immigrant. It is majority minority, and they have outsized health needs that we provide care for, and they're also a group of patients who in fact should have access to cutting-edge therapies, and we hope that development of those therapies in the Bronx could be rolled out to help the patients that we care for.
Yeah. So that's great. I mean, it's kind of a stop between Lower Manhattan and Westchester, and there's a lot going on in Westchester. So let's dig in and start. Why don't you tell us what you're all about?
Thank you. We are a business called Clarapath, and we're developing one of the first robotic technologies for the laboratory. In very specifically, the pathology space hasn't changed much in about 100 years. Mm-hmm. The equipment in the space really hasn't changed in probably 30 years in a very meaningful way. What most people don't recognize is that pathology really is the underpinnings of practicing medicine. As the world has evolved the past 10 years, lower reimbursement rates, COVID, there is a renewed need for digital technologies, and that's been a push the past 10, 15 years. We are trying to develop, and we are developing, one of the first robots, and the best way to describe it for the folks that don't understand pathology, we're developing the deli slicer, if you will, for tissue processing. We cut very thin cross sections of biopsies. We place them on glass slides, and we use advanced optical techniques, and then actually physically produce a slide that's then looked at by a pathologist. We have a unique set of requirements that Clarapath, because we are a cutting-edge robotics company, we bring people in from every discipline of engineering. Mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, software engineers, electrical engineers, optical engineers, and each one of those has a unique set of skills and experiences. And so we have a unique set of requirements when we think about people, but also locations. We have to be close to our investors, our customers, which Westchester represents really a tremendous spot in terms of healthcare, pharmaceutical firms, Regeneron, New York Medical College, Northwell, Mount Sinai, the list, White Plains, the list goes on and on. We are close on the clinical side, but also on the pharmaceutical front.
And where does your technology come out of?
We are actually a spin-out originally of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories.
I was going to say, I think I saw your logo on the Long Island presentation, but I didn't want to make a mistake. So yeah, Cold Spring Harbor,
that's correct.
Great.
And it's funny how all of this kind of comes together. When I think of New York just generally as an economic region and hub, everyone likes to say Silicon Valley or Boston, but the reality is New York and Northwell Health is one of our largest investors and partners. The technology originated with a professor at Cold Spring Harbor. His name is Dr. Partha Mitra, doing work with neurodegenerative diseases and mapping the brain circuits. And that then transferred to technology that we commercialized and then incubated within Northwell Health. And ultimately that progressed into a site. We have a site actually in Soho, a laboratory at the New York Genome Center. And very quickly we realized that that space was not adequate for our needs, and that moved, and we really needed about 12, 15 times the square footage with a mix of wet lab space, but also distribution/production level space, which is a unique set of requirements.
And because it's pathology and machines, robotics combined, that's what brings that unique requirement.
Exactly. We have, people come to the facility and they say, well, I feel like I'm in an old industrial machine shop. That is an aspect of what we do. And all of the componentry all goes into, which are coming from high precision machine shops, but all of that gets packaged and assembled at our facility up in Westchester. And that requires clean rooms, ISO 13485 certifications, and a host of other unique sets of requirements.
So how many square feet are you in?
Today we are in totality between the two facilities about 10,000 square feet. We will probably take that up in the next couple of months to about 20 or 25,000.
Right. So this is a good example of a company comes out of an academic lab. He's studying the brain, right? And this kind of an application can come out of that. That's what I love about this industry and this science. You just never know where it's going to lead you. And they established a 10,000 square foot lab coming out of kind of the incubator, so to speak. And then now their next requirement is 25,000 square feet. And that's the way it moves. And then the next one will be 75,000, in terms of the growth trajectory. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Great. So Ratan, you want to say a few words about what you're doing?
Sure. Thanks very much. It's great to be here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our institute. We're the Burke Neurological Institute. We're affiliated with Weill Cornell Medicine, and our focus is really on figuring out how to repair the brain and the spinal cord once individuals have exhausted everything that the healthcare system can offer them. So patients with stroke, spinal cord injury, Alzheimer's disease, I think many of you may be aware that stroke and Alzheimer's disease constitute the leading causes of cognitive and physical disability in the United States. And with the aging population and our ability to keep people alive longer, it's thought that by 2050, these two diseases alone will cost the United States $1.4 trillion a year, and that begin to touch the personal suffering that ensues from these diseases. So I was particularly excited to come to Burke and Westchester. I actually moved my lab from the middle of Harvard Medical School, and my chair at the time said, "You'll never be able to recruit anyone to Burke or to Westchester." And I wanted to just emphasize to everyone the opposite has been true. That over the past 20 years, we've grown our utilizable research space from 5,000 to 55,000. We've increased our NIH budget from $4 million to nearly $15 million, and our total budget from nearly $4.5 million to $20 million. We've got 23 Cornell faculty now, as opposed to 6 back then, and there are a couple of programs that I want to tell you about that are particularly exciting. So, and really an example of us in a county where we have the ability to punch up. So one of our investigators has really promising data that an agent called benfotiamine can slow progression from mild cognitive impairment to Alzheimer's disease. And he recently received an outstanding score for a 50-center, $46 million grant that will test this in a phase 3 study. You know, there, as you know, many companies are putting millions of dollars into this effort. Gary Gibson and his colleagues have been studying this at Burke since 1978, and their ideas about metabolism and mitochondria really have traction. The other thing that I wanted to tell you about was that we recently received $5 million from ESD to set up the first chronic clinical trials platform for chronic stroke. So part of the problem is great science is not getting to patients because the flow from preclinical to clinical is constipated. This clinical trials platform will bring together robotics and the best agents from phase 2 agents from companies that can come together and really result in large improvements in impairment and dramatic reductions in disability. And this represents a collaboration between the University of Rochester, the Stratton VA in Albany, the Burke Neurological Institute in Westchester, and then a CRO called ContraFect, but with the amazing support of ESD. And I just wanted to finish, too, by saying that because we have a number of academic investigators, they are generating intellectual property, and that is being licensed by companies. So we have one company, Neuronasal, that's developing a sideline treatment for traumatic brain injury or concussion, like on the football field, where you can give the treatment intranasally. This already has received $6 million in Series A funding and is moving forward to patients. The other example is Glenn Prusky, who's the head of our Center for Vision Restoration, has used George Lucas Health technology to develop really nifty methods for monitoring vision in anyone, whether you can speak or not speak, within 3 or 4 minutes. And so this is going to, and these types of techniques, which are highly automated, are going to increase the throughput of being able to do visual assessments. They increase the sensitivity, and then will be great ways to track the effectiveness of treatments. And that's been licensed to Novocyte, a biotech company in Israel. So that I'll stop and likes to.
That is really exciting to hear about the growth and development of your institute and all of the exciting treatments and products that you're working on up there. It's amazing. Barry, do you want to talk a little bit about Sapience?
Absolutely. Thank you for having us join the panel today. No, so I think we're that step before where Clarapath is, in the sense that we started with a 300 square foot lab and are now up in that 1,200 square foot lab space with 1,000 square foot of office space, but looking to move into that 10 to 15,000 square foot space next year here in Westchester. Westchester has been a great home for us due to its location, ability to draw folks from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Rockland, Putnam, Connecticut, and the city. And honestly, our workforce comes from everywhere. And that's been critical to us. So I figured I'd change it up a little bit and show you a little science today, show you a little bit about what we're doing here. And the original technology was out of Columbia University, so another New York-based institute involved, and it really speaks to the ecosystem. I've been fortunate to help found 2 biotechs, and the first one was with technology from the Rockefeller University, and that company's located in Yonkers, and this is out of Columbia, and we're located up here in the heart of Westchester. So what we're doing is we're taking a new approach to cancer treatments, trying to go after what are traditionally called undruggable targets, and I'll describe what those mean. Why don't we go to the next slide? I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the company. And what we see here is our executive summary slide, in which all my formatting has been stripped away, but the words are still there, so we could talk to it. What we're doing is we're using a different type of drug called peptides, sort of a hybrid between a chemical small molecule and being a smaller version of a protein. And we can use these to go after these undruggable targets, which are targets that reside inside of the cancer cell. I'll show you on the next slide what those mean. Starting with a single asset from Columbia, we decided to develop an entire discovery platform to enable us to discover new drugs that are very similar in the way they look, but they go after different targets within the cancer cell. And we've been successful in the endeavor to develop a platform, and we now have a pipeline of molecules, of 11 different molecules, whether they're in the discovery stage or all the way up now into the clinic, and that's our lead program, ST1. This is a first-in-class treatment approach that goes after a target inside of the cancer cell known as CEBP-beta. Last summer, we moved it into the clinic, and this month, we're going to move to phase 2 clinical studies. So far, it's been shown to be safe, and we've also successfully treated several cancer patients, and I'll give you a glimpse into what that looks like. We have other molecules against very important targets emerging right after, including ST316. That should move into the clinic late next year, and that goes after one of the most sought-after targets within cancer. We've been fortunate to attract initial investment from Celgene and follow-on investments from Bristol Myers Squibb. And as I mentioned, we've had strong academic collaborations, including Columbia University. As we go to the next slide, please. So in short, this is what we do. We look at interactions within a cell, as we see up here on the top left panel where it says protein-protein interactions. These are interactions that at certain stages of life are very critical to cell survival. The ones we go after would be critical for stem cells or for developmental stage cells. But as cells mature in our body, as we become adults, these interactions are actually shut off. They no longer are active. Certain times cells will reactivate these. And when that happens, these interactions become oncogenic, or they can become the reason why cells become cancerous. If we look in the middle panel, we can see what these interactions look like when we see today's current classes of drugs. There are 2 classes of drugs that we think about. Chemicals like chemotherapies, which are these small little dots here, or antibodies, such as that could be used for immunotherapies or other types of treatment in cancer. So when pharma and biotech companies think about treating drug targets, this is what they go to. There are shortcomings of these that don't allow these particular targets to be addressed. So the chemotherapies can travel around the body, they can get into the cells, they can get into the nucleus. So they get where these interactions exist. But these are not enzymatic interactions. There's no way for them to be drugged by these small entities. So even though these drugs can get there, there's no targets for them to address. Antibodies or large molecules do this very well. They do it as part of our immune system, they do it as drugs. But they cannot access the inside of a cell, so they can't get into the cell membrane. right? So they can drug these but can't get there. So because of these two phenomena, our industry calls them undruggable. We believe that's a fallacy of a term. We believe you have to look for new modalities, and peptides, specifically Sapience's peptides, can address them. These are stable molecules that can be administered intravenously. They can travel across the blood-brain barrier to treat cancers in the brain. They're small enough to get into the cytoplasm and get into the nucleus. But when they get there, they're large enough to bind and disrupt these interactions. And what will happen is you'll lose those complexes. You'll lose what those complexes were doing to those cells to make them cancerous, and those cells will undergo specific cell death. So we have an entire pipeline of these, and as I mentioned, our first one moved into the clinic about 1.5 years ago. And if we flip to the next slide, I'll show you one really encouraging piece of data from one of the patients in our study. So our drugs are intended to treat metastatic diseases. Specifically, our first clinical trial will test patients with metastatic melanoma, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and glioblastoma, the most severe form of brain cancer. Here we're looking at a biopsy from a patient that was treated in our phase 1 study. We're looking at 3 images. The image on the left is from before treatment. The image in the middle is from after 9 weeks of treatment. The image on the right is after 6 more weeks, so after week 15 of treatment. And what we see, this patient had 4 target tumors in their body. We're looking at the biggest one. This is a 36 millimeter, almost 3.5 centimeter target tumor lesion here. After 9 weeks of receiving ST-101, this lesion shrunk by around 50% to 19 millimeters. And upon 6 weeks later, you see it continue to shrink a little bit, but also the general architecture of this tumor changed. These changes, along with the other shrinkage in the tumor volumes, made this what we would call a clinical response, partial response. This is the goal of many cancer therapies. So anything between a 30% reduction in tumor size to a 99% reduction in tumor size falls within this category of partial response. And our patients currently sitting around a 40% reduction in tumor. Also in this phase 1 study, we've had patients on drug for over 1 year with stable disease and others with 6 months of stable disease. So we're very excited about the potential for this program, for all of our pipeline molecules, and we're going to really build this company into something strong up here in Westchester. And that's been really fortunate to have the academic sites here to help us out, the incubators, and then, folks like Clarapath showing us the way to build those bigger lab spaces. And, we're looking at some lab spaces near where they are as well. And with that, happy to pass it back to the moderator.
Thanks, Barry, for the science lesson. I think all of you can kind of understand now. This is a true science tenant that, would be living and growing in a building or development that one of you might work on. And this is how they spend their days is, measuring these kinds of things, following these things, testing them in the clinic, and hoping, that they get good results so that they can really help patients. So that was a great example of that. Thanks, Barry. And then Jonathan, we are interested in what you're doing at White Plains Hospital.
Great, thank you. We serve a different function within the innovation ecosystem of Westchester County, one that we're happy to serve and I think we're proud of as well. So we're White Plains Hospital. We're a tertiary care hospital located in White Plains, not surprisingly. And our function, if you go to the first slide, please, is essentially my team, we run a corporate venture capital firm. So we're charged with identifying and implementing new tech and products that will improve the overall quality of healthcare that we deliver, operational efficiencies, patient satisfaction, whatever the case may be. And we then leverage our strategic position as a hospital to secure any potential upside as an early adopter of new tech. So we like to look at ourselves as essentially a playground for startups to come in and do proof of concepts, do clinical validation, usability trials. Our typical deal structure, there is really no typical, but the 3 primary ways that we work and support startups are through collaboration type transactions where for an exchange for services in kind, we receive some type of remuneration either in the form of equity, revenue share, royalties. And like I said, we'll do clinical trials, we'll provide data, we'll provide actual feedback to different digital tech or medical devices in the field. Collaboration and investment, so we will also capitalize some of the companies that we collaborate with. And lastly, vendor and investment, so companies that may be a little bit later stage and don't need proof of concept anymore, that we have a need, we see the use case, we see the value prop, we'll ultimately deploy that technology as a customer and also look to capitalize as part of an investment round. To date, we've executed 8 transactions, and we've got 4 more that have been approved that we're still just working through finalizing. Next slide, please. So this is our structure. Everything we do is driven through the lens of the hospital mission. East Coast Road Ventures, which I mentioned, is our wholly owned subsidiary that we do the investing activities through, but ultimately we won't look at any technology or product that doesn't have a use case within our hospital and our health system. 3 components we've already talked about: the venture fund, where we source investment opportunities, we assess new companies and products, do our due diligence, transactions, and participate on boards. The accelerator, where we do look to commercialize our own IP. We do the proof of concept type transactions that I talked about in portfolio management. And lastly, the innovation management. So any technology that we deploy, we are responsible for implementing and then owning as well, which is great because we get to see it from sort of deal sourcing and origination all the way through implementation. We get to work through that with the startups, and we become true collaborative partners, and we're vested in the interest or the success of the company. Next slide, please. So lastly, this is our roadmap. We launched our innovation department in 2019. Started, not surprisingly, by hiring legal counsel to help us structure what we wanted to ultimately build. Our preliminary focus was digital health and virtual health specifically. And as a hospital in early 2020, you can imagine once COVID hit, we quickly had to digitize our entire ambulatory network, and were able to deploy what at that point had only been done in pilots at scale, our digital health or our telehealth solution, WPH Connect. We launched a text message-based COVID test result program. We also, given that our emergency department was inundated with patients, we deployed a load balancing algorithm to help manage the patient throughput in the emergency department, both for the provider's sake and for the patient's sake as well. We did learn a very important lesson as a result of our COVID experience, which was video visits were great, but they were very limiting in what we could ultimately do. So in the midst of the COVID pandemic, we did start looking at remote patient monitoring devices. We deployed a few devices into the ecosystem just to learn from the experience. Very quickly realized that people have different levels of comfort with technology. So we needed to build an ecosystem that meets patients where they are. So what I mean by that is we've invested heavily in active remote patient monitoring, but that still requires patients to do something. Step on a scale, take a blood pressure measurement, breathe into a spirometer. So when you're relying on someone to do something, adherence can become an issue. So we've also looked at identifying and securing passive remote patient monitoring devices, mostly through wearable devices where all patients have to do is wear the device and remember to charge it, and we can extract meaningful healthcare parameters outside of that. And as we look to the future, we are looking at asynchronous visits. We're looking at AI, leveraging AI for symptom checking and triaging, help interpreting data or sift through a significant amount of data. We're looking at future use cases for wearable devices. That's pretty much our ecosystem. But what's been interesting to me, coming to White Plains Hospital from an academic medical center in the city, I was curious to see if we could establish a pipeline of deal flow and collaboration partners, given our size and our location. And quite honestly, I've been impressed and overwhelmed by the success in doing that and the interest that we've seen. We don't invest only locally. We also look at companies internationally. We have a few investments overseas. And to see the level of interest that we've realized has been truly a testament to the region that we're in and the ecosystem that we're all building here.
Well, that is tremendous. So that brings yet another element into the regional context of the venture capital investment and, bringing the money that's required to help develop these technologies and help these companies grow. Very critical element. So you're playing a really important role in the Westchester ecosystem. So I think with all of these stories, you can see the richness of what's happening up in Westchester right now. We haven't talked about the big bear in the room, which is Regeneron. We will love to form a webinar or a future event on the development of their new campus up there, which is a truly unique story for the New York greater region. As I said this morning, a startup company that evolves into a fully integrated pharmaceutical company in a matter of 20 years doesn't happen very often, and they've been instrumental during the pandemic in developing really effective therapeutics. So we will try to organize a future event around that, because I think just seeing what they're building up there, some of you should Google it. It's really, really fascinating, and it's going to just make the Westchester County area explode. So thanks all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful work, Guy. We're going to look forward to hearing more about Guy's development in January.
Look forward to
He's
being back.
going to pull the veil back and show us what he's really up to up there.
Yeah, today was a bit of a teaser with one slide. We'll get them all.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
a couple of months. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.